Hi everybody. Okay, so we're on to Unit 13. This is the respiratory system. It is a relatively small system as far as the organs and the area of the body that we're going to be discussing. It works very closely with your cardiovascular system, which we've already covered, and its main job is to deal with the gases that your body needs, like oxygen, and then the waste product of cellular respiration, CO2. So getting oxygen in and carbon dioxide out are the functions, not even the main ones, but the functions of the respiratory system. And so there are two divisions. The first is the respiratory zone, and this typically is just the lungs, because that is where the gas exchange occurs. That is where oxygen is taken into the blood and CO2 is released from the blood. Now we've talked about the other gas exchange, and that's where the oxygen leaves the blood and goes into cells, and the CO2 comes out of the cells into the blood. Remember, that's where that takes place, in the capillaries. But this is the other gas exchange. And then the conducting zone, these are the passageways that get your the air from your nose or your mouth down into your lungs. And so these are the tubes, the openings, everything between, like I said, your face and then pretty far down into your lungs. Okay, so starting with the nose, there is a nice big picture of one. Your nose has 5 main functions. First off, it's the airway for respiration, so it's how air gets in, CO2 gets out. Also, incoming air, breathing in through your nose, is beneficial because you have your nasal passages that the air will have to pass through, and that provides moisture. It's very humid in there. It also warms the air, so that it's not a shock to your lungs, basically by the time that the air gets down there. And we've talked about it a little bit already, but it's helpful when you're exercising outside, particularly when it's colder, to breathe through your nose, because that, it's not such a shock. You don't get that pain in your chest as often. Your nose also is lined with cells that are producing mucus, and it has hair. You have hair in your nose, of course, and this filters the air, gets out any foreign material that you don't want to breathe in. So it could be dirt or dander, pollen, all those kinds of things. If you're allergic to those, then you guys know you have a whole different set of problems. But if you're not, and it just simply gets cleaned out of the air, then you swallow it as you swallow that mucus, and your stomach, the stomach acids, basically your digestive system takes care of it. You don't get any nutritional value from that, but it kills those things that could potentially make you sick. Your nose, also serves as a resonating chamber for speech. So this is, your tone, how you sound. You really don't think about it probably very often until you have a cold and you're stopped up, because then your voice sounds different. Can sound different to you, definitely, because you hear it kind of differently. But also other people can, that nasal sound. And then of course, the nose holds your olfactory receptor. So this is your sense of smell. And again, it's a receptor that causes a chemical reaction that carries this impulse somewhere in your brain to help you interpret what you are smelling. Okay, so now the external nose. So what you see, there are 7 different parts listed there, and I know that picture to the right is kind of weird because it has that little, it kind of shows you the bone and all that kind of stuff. But so the 7 parts that you see, first off, the root is between your eyebrows, so it's a little extension down of your frontal bone, and so it's right between your eyebrows. And then the bridge is right between your eyes. This is the part sometimes you might pinch, like if you have a pressure headache. This is also typically like where your glasses would sit. You have the dorsum nasi, which is between the bridge and the apex. So it's kind of like the length of your nose. The apex is the tip. The philtrum is between below the tip of the nose, between your nostrils. So it's that little kind of line that divides your nose, or your the openings into the two nostrils. And of course you have your nostrils. Sometimes these are called the external nares. That's the openings. And then the ala. Remember, ala stands for wing. We use this word when we talked about your hip bone and kind of your open, like your pelvic bone, and kind of that curved shape. And so, so those are the parts of your external nose. And then going on back now into the nasal cavity. So there's a lot going on there. So they lie behind and kind of in some of what's considered your external nose, like right here. That's nasal cavity. And those cavities are formed by the different cranial bones. Or when we did the skeletal system, we listed some of those, the sphenoid and the ethmoid, and the frontal, of course, on top, and the palatine, like the roof of your mouth. And so, so they form these little caverns in your head, basically. And their main job is to do all those things that we just talked about with the nose. But the different areas have a little bit different either structures or functions in some cases. But the area just above the nostrils, so kind of up into your head, is lined with skin cells, like epidermis cells that contain oil, sweat glands, hair, and that filters out the lint, dust, pollen, stuff that you would breathe in. The oil and the sweat glands help, again, a little bit with that kind of the stickiness. It also is where you have the olfactory mucosa, which are the receptors for the different odors that get into your nose. It's how you smell things. And then there's also respiratory mucosa, and this is an area that is lined with ciliated cells that, as the mucus gets trapped in the, as the foreign body gets trapped in the mucus, first off, it starts digesting it almost right away. That the mucus has some antibacterial enzymes in it, but it also, the cilia start to move that mucus towards the back of your throat, and so it kind of moves back in waves. Every time you breathe something in, that your nose kind of throws your nose off and knows something's going on that shouldn't be, and so your cilia start to really push stuff back so that it can be swallowed. There are lots of blood vessels in your nasal cavity. This is the source of nosebleeds. The skin is very thick with blood vessels, but it's also very prone to drying out when the weather's really dry, or you go to a dry area of the country. You run your heater a lot at home. And because the blood vessels are so close to the surface, if the skin cracks or dries out a little bit, then the blood vessels are open, basically. There's also, you have some paranasal sinuses, and these are around your nasal cavity. So we listed those when we did the bones, kind of up in your forehead and your cheek area. They are around your nasal cavity, which is right in the middle. They, again, warm and moisten. That is a huge deal, which, again, we don't think about it, but it is makes a big difference in your breathing. I threw a little that rhinitis down there at the bottom, and I feel like I left an I out of there, so that may be a typo. But anyway, that is the inflammation of the nasal mucosa, and that lines your nasal cavity. And so this is basically the reaction of your body, like allergies or anything that kind of shouldn't be there causes this inflammation. And your body's response to that whole situation is just to overproduce mucus. Like, we don't know what you are. You're bad. We're going to drown you in snot. And so that's the extra runny nose and just the discomfort of allergies mainly. Okay, so now moving on. So we've talked about the nose, and then moving on back to the throat, which is your pharynx. It connects the nasal cavity up above to your mouth, and the mouth, to the larynx and the esophagus. And the pharynx is divided into 3 segments. The nasopharynx, which is above the mouth, so this is right behind your nose. This only should contain air. You have the little thing that hangs down in the back of your mouth called your uvula, and when you swallow foods or liquids, it kind of swings up and kind of covers that opening, and so the food or the liquid have nowhere to go but down. This can malfunction, as some of you probably know, if you're talking or laughing while you're eating or drinking. Sometimes your uvula doesn't quite get it right, and that's when you have like milk come out your nose and all that kind of stuff. Also in this area are your tonsils. They're different names, adenoids or the pharyngeal tonsils. They are part of your lymphatic system, which is related to your immune system. They typically in kids are bigger than in adults because, again, kids get more stuff because they just haven't been around it as much. Your tonsils can become enlarged if you deal with a lot of different respiratory stuff. And lots of kids get their tonsils removed. It doesn't lessen your immune system or your immune response any at all. And it typically can help with like breathing, and like when little kids snore, it's a lot of times because their tonsils are just too big. Okay, the oropharynx, oro means mouth, so this is right behind your mouth. So air goes through here, and food and liquid, because you're swallowing it. This passageway is a little bit tougher, thicker than the nasopharynx because of the friction of food and liquid. And this also is the area where like if you have strep throat, this is the area that hurts. This is the area that gets inflamed and red. It's like when you go to the doctor and they check and they like do the strep test. This is where they are trying to, get the little, like the scrape the back of your throat thing. That's where stuff like strep throat, tend to kind of set up camp and cause issues. Then you have the laryngopharynx, and this is between the oropharynx and the larynx. Okay, so now next one, the larynx is your voice box. It is a structure made of cartilage. It is attached to your hyoid bone, which remember sits up kind of under your neck. The laryngopharynx, so it's kind of like right in between there, and then the trachea. So it is, everything kind of has to kind of pass around or close to this. So 3 functions, provides an open airway, so you can breathe air in and out. It also is kind of a director for directing food to your stomach, food and liquids to your stomach, air to your lungs, and this is directed by your epiglottis, which is a little flap that basically has the air passage open all the time. When you swallow something, then the epiglottis swings over to cover the air passage, so for that swallow, the air passage is closed and the food can go right on down into the esophagus. Also, your larynx is part of how your voice is produced. There are, we talk about vocal cords a lot more often. They're considered, I think more now you hear people say vocal flaps. That sounds kind of weird to me. But those are just kind of the pieces of skin that are stretched across the larynx. And as you talk, air comes out and it vibrates your vocal cords. And that produces a vibration that leaves your mouth. You shape the sound waves with your mouth and your tongue, and that's how you speak. And then those sound waves hit someone else's ear, and that causes the vibration, and they interpret what you say. And so that's what your larynx is doing. Okay, then going on down now, below your larynx is your trachea. This is your windpipe. And it goes from your larynx down into your chest, and then it divides from there. Your trachea is in front. It is a hard tube. You don't want to crush your trachea, obviously, or you don't want it to be kind of smushy because air has to go through all the time. Okay, so here's a picture of all of that stuff. So notice the nasal cavity is kind of this big, let me see if I can mark it on there without making too much of a mess. It's this whole big passageway in here. So kind of in, your nose, but then also back behind it. This up above, and those are the paranasal sinuses. And then we have the different parts of the pharynx, the naso, which is right here behind your nose. The oropharynx is what they have listed here, and then they have hypopharynx. I listed it as the laryngopharynx, but so here's the oropharynx behind your mouth, so right there, and then the hypopharynx down here, and then this kind of these white circles right here, that's the trachea, those rings of cartilage that are hard so that that passageway stays open, and then behind it is your esophagus. That we won't really talk about much this unit, but it's what carries food on down to your stomach. Okay, so now into the lungs. We've got the bronchial tree, and you have two principal bronchi, and they branch out left and right from the trachea, and they run diagonally onto the lung on either side, left or right. The right bronchus, which is the singular of that word, is shorter and wider and a little bit more vertical up and down. This is also a more likely spot for an inhaled object. So, like if you accidentally inhale, like kids are kind of known for inhaling popcorn for some reason, or the little kernels at least. Typically it goes into the right lung. So just a little aside there. Then the principal bronchi, so left and right, they branch into secondary bronchi, 3 on the right, 2 on the left, and then they can continue branching for 23 different segments. So it's like, and I'll show you a picture of it, it's just like, like a tree almost, and it keeps branching until you get smaller and smaller. And they branch down into bronchioles, which are anything under 1 millimeter in diameter, so very small. And then they continue getting smaller and smaller. And at the end of the smallest bronchioles, you have alveoli ducts. And these are covered with alveoli. They look like grapes or like little balloons. And this is where the gas exchange actually occurs. As you're inhaling, oxygen goes through the alveoli into the blood. The CO2 comes out, and then you would exhale. We have, approximately 30 million alveoli, and they are, again, constantly working, or at least part of that gas exchange. Okay, so here is a picture. So there's the larynx and the trachea up here. And so notice the cartilage rings, and then they break or branch off, I guess I should say, into the right and the left, and then they continue to branch from there. And then you get down to this very smallest one, the bronchioles. Okay, so now the lungs. The lungs are a pair, of course. You have a left and a right. They take up most of the space in your chest cavity and your thoracic cavity. They stretch all the way from your collarbones, so right up, way up there, all the way down to the base of your diaphragm, so like the bottom of your, like your ribs, like right in front. They are very close up against the ribs themselves. That's why you sometimes hear about people, like if people have broken ribs, sometimes it will puncture a lung. The left lung is slightly smaller and has a little kind of indentation in it called the cardiac notch, and this is for your heart. The left ventricle of your heart kind of extends into that notch. Each lung, we've already said, is divided into lobes, 2 on the left, 3 on the right, and then they are divided into the bronchopulmonary segments. So you have these different segments. If a segment becomes diseased with something, cancer, or something else, like mainly cancer, then you can remove a segment without damaging the others. And the person may obviously have a diminished lung capacity, but they will survive. And so, so that's not an uncommon thing. Lungs are surrounded by the pleura, which we talked about a similar structure around the heart. It's a double membrane. It has fluid in between that acts as a lubricant. The pleura actually divides the thoracic cavity into 3 sections. There's one for the heart and then one for each lung. When we dissect our fetal pigs, you'll see kind of the covering over each of these organs, not super thick, not like the meninges, but it is very, it's part of the structure and kind of helps keep those things safe. Okay, sorry, somebody came in. Okay, so let's see where I was. Okay, so the pleura divides everything out. So the heart and each lung kind of have their own separate little segment. There is a disease, I guess, called pleurisy that you may have heard of. It's the inflammation of the pleura. Remember that issy or the itis part at the end. It can cause a decrease in that pleural fluid, and it can cause very painful breathing. It can also cause too much fluid and restrict your breathing because the lungs are kind of smushed a little bit. It's one of the things they listen for when the doctor, puts the stethoscope on your back and says, take a deep breath in and let it out, to hear if the pleura is kind of rubbing against itself smoothly. If it's not, they can hear kind of the rubbing, and then they know there's some inflammation there. It's a very common thing as you get older to deal with pleurisy. Okay, and that's it. So here are the lungs. So this shows the segments. It's not the greatest picture, but it's what I found. What I really like, what I want you to see mostly in this picture are this little outset of the alveoli, and how they're just like little tiny balloons that look like grapes. But that is where the gas exchange is really occurring, and like a really big kind of important part of the important part, I guess you would say, of the respiratory system. So, okay. Sorry, I know I feel like I was kind of all over the place as usual. Of course, ask me questions and I will see you guys in class.